Hello there and welcome to my latest podcast. I am one of some 500,000 Britons who over the last 50 years have become second homeowners throughout Europe. I realise how lucky I am to have the opportunity to own a property abroad. For many, their dream arose out of their holiday experiences, their favourite resort or beach. For many, they invested their hard-earned savings to establish their dream, to live a new and expanded life, embracing all that travel should and indeed has to offer. Through the COVID crisis, they are the forgotten ones, because their ownership is seen simply as a means to go on holiday, and so they join the great legions of holidaymakers who have not yet been able to travel abroad. But one aspect is missing from this consideration, and that is they have made a financial investment, and like any other property owner, they need to keep a check on the property, make repairs, or organise assistance from professional builders, product suppliers or property minders. But whatever about these services, most of us know that as property owners, we have a unique eye for the state and condition of our properties. We are the ultimate guardians of our investments. Like me, most of these property owners have not been able to visit their properties for nearly 2 years, properties of which may be in areas that are subject to great heat, storms and winter conditions. This predicament is one that I've lived with like every single citizen in the UK and throughout Europe. In the summer of 2020, there was an opportunity to head over to my property, but I hadn't been vaccinated. In fact, the prospect of a vaccine didn't really become clear until the late autumn of 2020. So like many millions, I stayed at home and took a very short staycation in the Cotswolds. 2021 presented a different and changing picture with the arrival of vaccines, but it wasn't until early June that the prospect of the possibility of travel opened up. It was at this point that I began to consider whether this presented a safe opportunity to get out to my property. I checked all the local newspapers, spoke with neighbours and examined the French government website information. Like many European countries, France decided on the 9th of June that those who were double vaccinated could enter the country without the need to quarantine, as long as they were able to show a negative antigen or PCR test, and that they had signed a declaration that they had not been in contact with those affected by COVID. As a family, we decided that we would minimise risk by my travelling on my own, with just my pets for company. Now, this story, whilst principally about COVID, also has elements of Brexit woven into it. For example, I had to organise an animal health certificate for the 2 pets at a cost of £230. This 13-page document, with many signatures and stamps on it, replaced the convenient pet passport that was efficient, clear and universally accepted throughout Europe. Go figure. And also bear in mind that in the future, some 250,000 pet owners who normally take their pets abroad will have to encounter that hurdle and pay those costs. I then had to organise my test and found a self-administered test which was organised through an app created by some London-based doctors. I took the test, which was negative, and received my travel certificate within 30 minutes, all for the cost of £45. I then arranged for my declaration and gathered together all necessary and additional Brexit documentation. One important aspect related to health. Whilst the UK government was opening up travel through its infamous traffic light scheme, the UK's Foreign Office was declaring that they were advising against all but essential travel to France. I checked with several travel insurance companies, and they all made it quite clear, whatever about the traffic light system, they would rely on the FCDO advisories, and so no cover would be given. I had a decision to make. Now, my family and I have had good experience of the French healthcare system for over 30 years. I had my EHIC card, still guaranteed by the Brexit Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and knew that at least 70% of any health bill would be covered by the scheme. I had a health check before I made a decision to ensure, as far as we could tell, I was fit in other ways to travel. I also decided that I wouldn't be climbing any ladders, carrying or lifting heavy items. I would reduce my risk or the potential for accidents. We also accepted that we may face a financial charge should anything happen whilst I was out there. With those decisions made and documentation gathered, I set off for the port, experiencing a 25-minute check-in where normally it would take 10 minutes max. Boarding the ship was orderly, and exiting from the car deck to my cabin was well organised and distanced between people. I had eaten before I arrived at the port, so I had no need to dine on board. After my alarm call in the morning, I took myself onto a deserted deck, watching as the coast of France, a coast I had missed so much, started to appear through the early morning mist. The sea was a smooth mill pond, with the ship gliding effortlessly towards the port. In truth, I felt emotional as we approached La Belle France, my favourite destination, and a country that has given so much of itself to me and my family over several decades. Getting back onto the car deck was equally distanced and safe. As I sat in my car waiting to disembark, I realised that many of the vehicles around me were occupied by property owners, evidenced by ladders, furniture and other items of DIY. Disembarkation was as expected. However, whereas it would normally take between 15 to 20 minutes to pass through document checks, this time it took 1 hour and 20 minutes. This, of course, was a combination of COVID and Brexit. Once clear of the port, I was on the open road and heading south, stopping occasionally at Aire de Rest to stretch mine and the animals' legs. 6 hours later, I arrived at my house to find many weeds and overgrowth. I was trepidous as I opened the door of my house, wondering what I would find. I was relieved to find that it was dry inside. 2 winters of bad weather had not created the damage I feared, but there were 2 years of spiders and cobwebs, the likes of which are only seen at Halloween parties. The great clean-up began both inside and out, with an initial trip to a nearby hypermarket, where all the measures I have come to expect were present, with people keeping socially distant and wearing their masks. Neighbours started to call by, telling me of their experiences, but obviously glad that we were back. I was equally glad to see them. I worked through the days and slept solidly at night, disturbed only by the cry of the owls or by passing storms. Every Monday I went to the local market, smelling the cheeses from the Pyrenees, sausage, chorizo, paella, churros, music from the bars, enjoying un café avec un Perrier. Once a week I gave myself the afternoon off and took myself to the banks of the River Dron in Aubeterre, taking a drink in the town square, where open-air concerts played to family groups distanced from other tables. Commerce was open in the town, all playing their part to keep people distanced, hand washes and limiting the numbers in their shops and bars. It felt like normal life was returning. I had begun to notice that there were very few British wherever I went, but there were many French on holiday, joined by their many cousins from Belgium and the Netherlands. On the 19th of July, the UK government made their expected announcement that those returning from amber countries would not have to quarantine for 10 days, all except those returning from France. The UK's rationale was that they were concerned about the beta variant, hence the decision. I'd already been out there long enough to realise that the French government were concerned about the Delta variant, Beta was a problem on their island of Reunion, some 6,000 miles away. I saw French government puzzlement about the UK's decision. Even my neighbours thought they were bonkers. It simply wasn't clear what was in the minds of the UK government. The big question we had was whether the UK intended to place France on the red list. There was certainly commentary in the press that had been discussed, hence their decision to create a new traffic light, the Amber Plus. Now, I didn't want to be trapped there or forced into an expensive hotel quarantine, so I decided to return to the UK and suffer the 10-day quarantine in my own home. So the great lock-up began. I had achieved 75% of my household tasks, but I needed to make the house winter ready in case I could not return before the end of the year. I had to organise a COVID test and found that every pharmacy in France offers an antigen test for €25. A PCR test can be organised at any hospital for €49, and you can find many private companies offering such tests for a greater cost. I also found that at Bordeaux Airport, for example, they were offering free COVID tests to departing French holidaymakers. Ah, la différence. So I organised my day 2 and 8 tests to be taken at home for £170 and completed my passenger locator form. I bade my farewells to my neighbours, offering the hope that we'd be back before the end of the year, and headed back to Normandy. When I arrived at Ouistreham, I found that this normally sleepy seaside town was awash with people on the beach and in the town, but mask wearing and distancing was evident. I managed to sit and enjoy a pavement bar drink, watching the world passing me by. I later found a restaurant which served me outside, enjoying as I do six huîtres, not everybody's cup of tea, but oh my, I had forgotten the pleasure. On arrival at the port, I again experienced a 25-minute check-in and a fairly effortless arrival on board, but I noticed that the passengers and their vehicles barely filled one car deck. On arrival in Portsmouth, the ship's announcements warned us about our quarantine and how we must organise all our documentation as they would be checked. In the days before I left, I caught sight of the news that a leaked memo to the border agency had advised that in order to deal with the so-called pandemic, they did not have to check all documentation. I noticed that, like me, adjacent car owners had organised their documents, but when the time came, I was barely 5 minutes at the border kiosk. Presumably because they had cross-referenced my passport with the locator form, but who knows? But nothing was said to me about quarantine. I was asked no questions. On the way home, I stopped at a service station, and the contrast could not have been more clear. Long shoulder-to-shoulder queues for a popular coffee outlet, no social distancing, with the majority wearing no masks. I couldn't get out quick enough. The prospect of hearing about the pandemic and about empty shelves in supermarkets had littered the messages that I'd received from family whilst I was away. There were no such gaps in shelves in France. All the shelves were full, despite the fact that the French operate a very similar system of isolation for their population. What on earth, I wondered, had been going on in the UK? So now I sit here in glorious isolation, which ends early next week. I was contacted 2 days after I returned to check I was indeed isolating. My first PCR test has come back negative, and now, with more navel-gazing from the UK government, the penny has dropped that they made the wrong decision about France and the Amber Plus category, and look ready to lift it, but seem also ready to impose that category on other European countries. Is it any wonder the travel industry is in despair? The moral of this story is that if you decide to travel, you'd better think through the consequences. Use your common sense. Don't listen to the commentary in the popular press, because it's often nonsense and contradictory. And above all, think about risk. Minimise that risk. But above all, also be prepared for the spasm of change that emanates from the UK government. If you can do that and keep your wits about you, you may just have a travel experience of what normal life was like once again. Until the next time, take care.